Let's dive deeper into what this war means for Iran and how it could escalate further still if the United States decides to enter. Joining us now is Trita Parsi, Iranian-American analyst and executive vice president of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Trita, welcome to MEELive.
Thank you so much for having me.
Donald Trump continues to hold the line that Iran needs to come back to the negotiating table and that this war is just a consequence of its refusal to agree to his terms for a nuclear deal. Does this feel like a reflection of the reality of the situation?
No, I think what happened is that talks are actually moving in the right direction up until the moment when Trump adopted the Israeli position of zero enrichment. What the US had tried for 20 years, it absolutely produced nothing. The Israelis knew that that would cause an impasse in the talks. And then once that impasse occurred and Trump started to lose patience, they pushed him hard to say, let us go in militarily and soften the Iranians so that they can come back to the table. Knowing very well that, of course, the Iranians would fight back. And instead of having a return to the table, it would create a scenario in which the Israelis could go back to the US and say, actually, you need to come into the war to finish this. And that happened within 24 to 48 hours after the Israelis started attacking Iran. So I think this is something that Trump caused to himself by acquiescing to the Israeli position of zero enrichment. It's the same position that John Bolton and Mike Pompeo convinced him to take in his first term, which also led to nothing but a stalemate. Now, keep in mind, talks were scheduled for Sunday. It's not that the Iranians walked away from the table. It's the Israelis who bombed the table, blew it up, and they did so with a yellow and a green light from Trump.
Now, Israel has not really kept a secret its intentions or its desire to start a full-scale war with Iran. We saw last year those two attempts by Netanyahu to lure Iran into a confrontation. Now, despite this, Iran has taken over the last 5 days a number of deeply painful hits to its military, its air defenses, and more importantly, its intelligence. How did it find itself so vulnerable to attack?
I think that's a great question, and it's really a good question as to why the Iranians were so nonchalant about the risk of the Israelis attacking, mindful of the fact that it was so clearly signaled that there was a high risk that they would do so. I think the Iranians thought that because Trump had said he wanted talks on Sunday, the Israelis would not attack before Sunday. I think that was a very commonly held view everywhere, including amongst many US allies. And this is part of the reason why I think the Iranians think that the US and Trump was completely complicit in all of this, that they deliberately lulled Iran into thinking that talks were coming, and then they bombed, and then having the audacity to afterwards saying, why did the Iranians walk away from the table? They need to come back to the table.
This war has expanded rapidly over the last 5 days, and attempts by Iran's government to de-escalate have largely been ignored. What options does it have now?
Well, first of all, I think the de-escalation calls are coming from regional states because they're terrified of the consequences of a regional war and the devastation that would inflict on the entire region. It is not coming from Western states in a credible way. If you want to have de-escalation, but you start off your statements by saying that Israel has a right to defend itself, even though it started a war of aggression, then you have negated everything else you're saying in that sentence in that statement after that sentence. And moreover, they're condemning the Iranians, and they're even saying that today the German chancellor said that Israel is doing Europe's and the West's dirty work for it. I mean, those are clear endorsements of what the Israelis are doing. You cannot claim that you are looking for de-escalation with statements of that kind.
And in the background, of course, Israel has been lobbying aggressively, both privately and also in public, for the U.S. to enter the war and help it take out the Fordo uranium enrichment facility and maybe even go further towards something like regime change. How would the situation evolve for Iran if the U.S. does decide to take that step and officially joins the war?
If the U.S. steps in to the war officially in a way that is no longer deniable by the Iranians, then the most likely scenario is that the Iranians decide that they have no choice but to fight back, and that they will then start targeting U.S. bases throughout the region, traffic in the Persian Gulf. There will probably be attacks against U.S. troops and embassies by other militias in Iraq, for instance. So we will see a widening of the war I don't think the Iranians will win such a war, but the question is how much damage will they inflict on the U.S. and on the region? And will that cause others to step in and really pressure for the war to end, or will it perhaps lead to a scenario in which Trump cuts the war short, as he did in Yemen, even though he did not achieve anything?
Now,
These are all terrible scenarios. At the end of the day, the Iranians will lose, the region will lose. I think the U.S. will lose to a very large extent. The only potential benefit factor of all of this is Israel.
and Trump seems to be debating his America First policy with some people in his own base, many of whom are angry at the suggestion that the U.S. could enter a war against Iran. There are, of course, more hawkish voices surrounding Trump that have long waited for this exact scenario to unfold. Whose voice is louder right now, and who is Trump actually listening to?
For the last week or so, it's very clear that he's been listening to not his own base, but to more traditional hawkish American Republican conservatives, and who many of them were never Trumpers recently. So in the America First camp, there's a strong sense of betrayal, not for the decision to go into war now, because that hasn't started yet, but simply for the decision of giving Israel a green or a yellow light. That is enough to have infuriated the America First base. So I can only imagine what it will be if this actually leads to the U.S. itself entering the war, having large number of American casualties in that war.
And finally, we saw this tweet from Trump that we just saw on the screen that came really late last night and caused immediately a panic across the hearts of people in Tehran who have already been inundated with aerial bombardment over the last couple of days. What are ordinary Iranians feeling in such a fraught moment like this?
I think most people are in a complete state of shock. No one expected this. Everyone understood that there was always a risk of war hanging in the background. But because talks were going on, diplomacy was happening, they were even supposed to happen 2 days after this attack. I think most people thought that this is still somewhat distant. The risk is there, but it's somewhat distant. That, I think, has shocked them. I think they've been shocked in the manner that the Israelis have done this, attacking apartment buildings, hospitals, the TV station, city centers. They blew off 5 car bombs in Tehran. If Iran had a team of intelligence officers in Tel Aviv who blew up 5 cars with car bombs yesterday, the West would correctly condemn that as terrorism. But in this case, there's complete silence. And of course, I think they're shocked to see that at least in the beginning, Iran's defenses were simply asleep. The air defenses were not even on. And that, of course, has also generated a tremendous amount of anger against the government. But I think that's been overrun by the anger against Israel.